Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Tenant Training, Building Safer Neighborhoods. My name is Sarah Douglas, and I'm the Independent Living Coordinator at Arise. Arise is one of the co-organizers of this event, along with the Community Health Network. This program is sponsored through a grant from the City of Auburn CDBG funding. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. Today's webinar is being recorded. You are currently in listen-only mode. You are automatically muted and your cameras are off. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions in the Q&A pane at the bottom of your screen. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we will collect them and address them during the Q&A session at the end of each presentation. Not all questions will be answered today. We will try to answer all questions that fall within the scope of the presentation if time allows. Any unanswered questions will be saved, answered, and uploaded into our virtual binder. So we are going to get started with our first presenter, Chris Scholl from the Cayuga County Health Department.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Hello. There he is.
I would say you are all set, Chris.
You can see and hear me?
Yep.
Very good. Well, good morning. So, as introduced, my name is Chris Scholl. I'm with Cayuga County Health Department, and my lead counterpart, Kendra Knapp, is here with me. That's her. Welcome this morning. So I thought I would just really quick, I would just let you know a little bit more about who I am. I've been working here at the Cayuga County Health Department just close to 20 years, and I've been doing the lead program for about the last 10 years. And we do a lot of different things here at the health department, but lead is one of the programs that we're mandated to do by New York State. It also happens to be a program that it allows us to get ahead of public health issues, obviously poisoning of children by lead. We can get some good positive outcomes with our cases as long as things go the way we hope they go. But the lead program and lead issues have taken a lot of our time, particularly in the last year when New York State changed the regulations for lead and what it takes for us to intervene in a lead case when a child has an elevated blood lead level. So it's a big program, and like I said, sometimes it doesn't always go the way we want it to in a procedural way, but it's one thing that we can actually get a hold of and make a difference for kids early on in their lives. So it certainly fits into the title of Building Safer Neighborhoods here in Auburn and throughout our county. So I have a PowerPoint presentation to show you that I hope it's not too dry, but it gives a good overview of lead poisoning and what we do in regards to it. And I guess if there are any questions, we'll do our best to try to answer them. So if we could start the PowerPoint, that would be great, please. So again, I've been here for quite a while, and we have to get certified by the US EPA. They're the folks that do all the certification and licensing, not just for folks like us who are called risk assessors, but private contractors and companies that work in the field of lead. So it's all overseen by the Environmental Protection Agency and to some extent New York State Health Department. So next slide, please. So what we have found is that the main source of lead poisoning is paint. Lead was put in paint many years ago, probably almost a century ago, in the 1920s or 30s. The reason lead was in paint was because it made the paint very durable and it would hold up against weather outside as well as wear and tear inside. And so lead was this kind of miracle product to make paint last longer, and it looked nicer. And unfortunately, we didn't know enough about it at the time. So there are other ways that lead gets out into the environment, and lead could poison children or adults for that matter. But the majority of our cases, probably 9 out of 10 or better, or the poisoning is coming from paint. What we also find is that dust is present in all of our homes, but what we found is that dust is in particular a major source of lead poisoning. When you open and close windows or open and close doors, the painted surfaces rub against each other. They impact each other. They create paint chips. Those paint chips get ground down into dust. That dust ends up being in the window troughs. It ends up on the floor, not to mention chips of paint. And of course, where are our kids? They're on the floor, and they're playing on the floor. And of course, they do a lot of hand to mouth, whether they're putting their fingers in their mouths or they put toys in their mouths or anything they can get a hold of. They do that. That's what kids do, right? They play on the floor. They put their hands in their mouth. Unfortunately, if there are lead hazards in the house, if there's chipping and peeling paint, it's on the floor. It's creating that dust. It's a pretty easy route to go from the floor, from the painted surface to the floor, to the child's bloodstream. To kind of dumb it down a little bit there, but there's more to it than that. But the dust in particular is what we found is a very kind of long-term source of lead poisoning. Next slide, please.
Hold on, it froze.
Okay, that happens.
There we go.
So one thing I want to impress upon tenants, if you're here because you're renting from someone that you don't own it, but you have either a landlord or maybe a maintenance person that you call when something's going on. Probably 2/3 of the houses in Auburn, and probably about that many in the older homes throughout the rest of Cayuga County, somewhere in these houses there's components with lead paint on them. It's no one's fault. It's just the way it is. We didn't know any better when we developed paint. So just the fact that a component in your apartment or your house, just because there's lead somewhere, it's not radioactive. It's not doing something to you if you touch it. Being around it doesn't cause lead paint. It's when the paint starts to peel or chip or flake, whether it's because you move furniture and you knock into the door casing and it creates some chips on the floor. That's when it becomes a problem. Not only the chips themselves, but the dust that's created. Kids, again, they've got their hands in their mouth. They've got their toys in their mouth. They can essentially swallow paint chips if they're picking them up on their hands. The lead dust can be breathed in, and so our lungs are also a route of exposure. We've also had some kids that have basically chewed on components. One of our worst situations is an old window with paint that's chipping or flaking, and of course, children are right at the height of windows, in particular the window sill, and little kids, up to 6 years old, that's what they do. They go to the window where everything's happening. And so kids by nature, up to 6-year-old, by nature, they're most susceptible to lead poisoning, just kind of by nature of what they do in their lives every day. Sometimes we joke about, well, we only care about kids. Adults can do whatever they want. However, when we do investigations, we want to make sure that if mom is currently pregnant, we do care about pregnant women, because mom can pass lead through her bloodstream during pregnancy to the unborn child. So we do care about pregnant women also. So next slide, please. So even if you don't have kids currently in your house, but let's say you're pregnant or you're trying to get pregnant, you know, we do care about you, and these things pertain to you if you don't have kids currently in your house. So like I just said, you know, where do kids go? They like to go to windows because they like to see what's going on outside, especially during the summer, right? And the windows are open because they can see what's going on. This is kind of an extreme example. If you have this in your apartment or house, this is not a good situation. Old window with old components. Here's the trough just loaded with paint chips, and it doesn't take much to see that you can see that the paint chips end up getting ground down as a very fine material and dust. And with an open window, that dust is getting basically blown right into the apartment. And if your child is right there, basically at mouth height to that window trough, that's about as easy a way to get lead poisoning as it gets. Situation like that, you know, that needs to be cleaned up. The trough needs a decent coat of paint afterwards. But even when you do that, you still have to eliminate the source, which is likely the tracks of the window. So every time the window is getting open and closed, it's just creating more chips. Next slide, please. So if you were to see something like that, or this window here, where underneath the windowsill, where the paint, the big sections of paint are coming off, that window is a very old window. It's a single pane window. Perhaps your apartment or house has windows like that. There's a pretty good chance that there's a layer of lead paint somewhere in there. It's not necessarily the top coat, because if you've been in an apartment that's changed tenants many times, usually the owner or landlord, they'll do a coat of paint in between occupancy, right? So there could be 20 coats of paint on that windowsill and window casing by now, and it's maybe layer 3 and 4 way down in that are lead. But it's when it gets exposed by being chipped and banged around, or the window open and closing, that's when it becomes a problem. So if you have this in your own home, thank you. If you have this kind of situation, or that previous slide where, you know, the trough is just loaded with chips, that's something you really need to let your landlord know about. At the very least, that should be cleaned up, but there should be a top coat of paint applied there to make sure that it doesn't chip farther. That, you know, ultimately what the solution should probably be is the windows should probably be replaced. At the very least, it needs to be cleaned up and addressed. It can be made safer. The safest thing would be for the window to be replaced, but it could be made safer by cleaning up and putting a top coat of paint on that. Next slide, please. Same issue here. Very old windows. It's not hard to tell that those are probably the original windows in this particular rental property. And again, the paint not only is falling off on the inside, the trough is loaded, the track on the very outside of the window, the paint is just peeling off and flaking every time the window is moved. More paint chips are down, and you can see the chips even on the windowsill itself. And then of course they end up on the floor, and that's right where kids are going to be. That's not a good situation right there. The other thing is there's no storm window, so that's not helping to protect anything either. That's something that you should alert your owner or landlord to say, hey, look, we need to really do something about this. Let's get it cleaned up and maybe get a coat of paint on that, so it's not, at least it has some amount of protection to it. Next slide, please. Same thing. You can see this, again, old window, single pane glass. The white paint on the inside of that track that you can see is kind of chipping in little blocks. That's all ending up down in the trough. If that window gets open, you know, the breeze is blowing dust in. This, again, these pictures we're showing you are pictures of components we know that contain lead. So these weren't like a guess, but these were lead containing components. So all those paint chips end up down in the trough and on the windowsill, and again, right where our kids are. Next slide, please. So paint is, again, probably 95% of the time, paint is the issue, but other places that we can find lead, just in the soil around our houses. For many decades, lead was also in gasoline, and the emissions from all of our automobiles sent basically airborne lead into the environment, and then it settles back down onto the ground, and it can accumulate in soil over time. It can also accumulate just by paint chips coming off the roof after it rains, drip line of the house, lead ends up in the soil. It can sometimes be in water. Flint, Michigan, from a few years ago is in people's mind, where a municipal source of water had a huge issue and caused widespread lead poisoning in kids all through that community. In Auburn and the villages in our county that are on public water supplies, they're required to test the water quarterly for lead. And in Auburn in particular, there has not been a positive sample, water sample for lead in Auburn's water supply the entire time I've worked here, and I'm not sure even if it has happened any time for some quite amount of time before I started here. So Auburn's water is very safe as far as lead goes, and as well as the rest of our villages like Fairhaven, Moravia, Aurora. They've all got good water supplies, no lead there. Things like jewelry that are made in parts of the world that don't have the same standards that we have for manufacturing. Jewelry can contain lead in the smelting process of whatever they're using to make little trinkets and jewelry. Food that comes from some of the Latin American countries, also India and Pakistan, some of those food items, because they're produced in, again, places that don't have the regulations that we do here, they get cross-contaminated with lead, and then they get sold around the world, and there is a process to try to screen that stuff out, but it doesn't always happen, and it can get through the system, so to speak, and sometimes you might hear about recalls for things that may contain lead. People that might do some hobbies, like maybe if you throw clay to do pottery, in the glazing, there used to be lead in some glazing of pottery, so that's an issue if you're doing that as a hobby. Some folks use herbal remedies like grandma's old tincture for headaches, or folks that come from Southeast Asia make their own home remedies. Sometimes those contain lead in some of the constituents that they use. Certain jobs and hobbies, people that work in factories, obviously people that work around metal smelting, that sort of thing. You could be bringing lead home on your clothing, on your hair. Hobbies, like if you have anybody in the house that hunts or fishes, ammunition has lead in it. Fishing sinkers are made of lead. Those are another source. Sometimes they're in cosmetics. So there's other ways lead can kick around. We've had cases where that wasn't the paint, it was something like bullets, for example, that were left around or handled, and the lead transferred to the child. So there's other ways we can find lead in the environment. Next slide, please. So we don't want anyone to have any lead poisoning. Like I said, it's not that we don't care about adults. We do for sure, especially pregnant women or folks that want to get pregnant. But for kids, it's because, as their body grows, their body's taking in everything they can, water, nutrients, and anything else they're exposed to. So lead is very easy for lead to transfer into a young person's body. And what we found is over time, and depending on a child's exposure, there are learning disabilities that start happening. It can affect just their physical growth, their height and weight. There's behavioral problems. Some folks think, geez, my child seems to be very hyperactive. I can't get them to calm down. Sometimes that's a sign that there could be some sort of amount of lead poisoning. But again, long term, the most concerning thing is kids start to have serious learning issues as they enter school. And it's not easy for educators or anyone else to figure out, gee, why is this child maybe falling behind a little bit or having a hard time understanding concepts? Sometimes the culprit is lead poisoning. Next slide, please. So IQ points are lost from anyone from lead poisoning, but in kids in particular, and any IQ points a child loses because of lead poisoning, they're not going to get that back. So that's the important thing for us to try to get ahead of this before those impacts to a child's IQ are basically permanent. And like the previous slide said, no amount of lead is good. We want children to have blood tests that come up with 0, so we can head off all these side effects. And at really high levels, there's permanent brain damage, and children have died from extreme exposures to lead. That's usually when they've swallowed something that's very hot with lead and then repeatedly get exposed. Fortunately, we've not had any deaths here, but we do have some kids that we're following that have some pretty serious issues. Next slide, please. So if we have these we have old housing stock in Auburn and throughout Cayuga County. It's just the way it is. We have a lot of old homes. 95% of this slide, 95% of the housing in Auburn was built prior to 78. Why is that? What's the significance of 1978? Well, that was when the federal government passed laws to say that we're not going to have lead in paint anymore. We also took it out of gasoline and other places that consumers, basically purchase every day. So up to 78, we started zeroing out what lead was put in. But since most of the housing stock was built before that, like I said, it's a good chance that, every house in Auburn may have at least a lead component in it, practically. And again, like I said at the beginning, just the presence of lead isn't a problem. Just because you have lead-containing components, that's not a problem. It's the maintenance of those things. As windows age and doors get old, and if just plain surfaces, if they're not addressed, it just gets worse. So part of it is just maintaining what we have to make sure everything stays in good shape. And if there's water damage from a leaking roof, that needs to be fixed, because water damage will cause paint to peel and chip. So the overall maintenance of the house is important, and then getting more specific what's going on with certain components. So we can kind of go into some of this thinking that, well, we'll just assume that my house, my apartment, we'll just assume that unless it's been majorly remodeled, that there's likely some lead components in your dwelling. So we need to make sure that we keep them maintained. And when you see things are getting really deteriorated, you need to reach out and have a conversation with the owner or your landlord to say, hey, let's get these things addressed before they get worse. But we'll just it's best just to assume that you likely have some lead components in your dwelling, and let's make sure they're maintained well. Next slide, please. Our data pretty much stays the same. We have a fairly steady percentage. This slide, we haven't updated this one slide here, but a year ago in October, the state changed regulations of how kids are tracked. It used to be if it was more than 15, our part of the health department would get involved. Now it's a level of 5. It's not very difficult for a child to have a blood lead level of 5. It could be a very quick exposure to some dust, or even just one quick exposure to like a paint chip. So it's not very difficult for a child to get a 5. We've had some kids that have had levels so high that they had to have a procedure called chelation, which they have to be hospitalized for several days, and it's an awful process to try to remove the lead from the bloodstream. But again, as the bottom reinforces, the vast majority are from peeling, flaking, chipping paint, and the lead dust, not other reasons, not other sources. So it's the paint that we are particularly concerned about. Again, because this level of 5 is very easy to get a level of 5. Next slide, please. Change that. Mm-hmm. Unless you did. Yep. So if we have deteriorating components, we need to fix them. That's, you know, probably the best way to do that is we need to upgrade the housing, whether it's replacing windows and doors or just, you know, doing a good thorough job at repainting, you know, door casings, window casings, and so on. Our nursing side of the health department here reaches out to folks to talk about the nutrition of the child. Very good nutrition, certain foods help process the lead out of their bodies faster. Plenty of water helps, not necessarily sugary juices and things, but plain old water and good diet of vegetables and fruits, which all kids like, I'm sure. That's the best way from the nursing side of things to make sure that the lead can exit the body quicker. But this chelation thing is it's a terrible thing to have to put a small child through, and we don't want it to get, we certainly don't want it to get to that level, and those are usually extreme cases, but you know, we have to improve our housing stock. That's the biggest long-term way we're going to prevent lead poisoning. Next slide, please. So like I said already, there's enough research now that lead poisoning, it causes long-term speech and hearing issues, difficult to pay attention in class, so their learning and memory issues are affected. Sometimes attention deficit disorder and lead go hand in hand. Someone might think, well, that kid has attention deficit disorder. Sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes that's what it's from, but however, the lead poisoning and attention deficit disorder seem to be linked together, and there's also seems to be a link with kids that have been diagnosed with autism also. So they kind of gang up on the kid, and we're not really sure which came first. Did the lead poisoning, you know, exacerbate the attention deficit disorder? Does the autism, issues with autism, do they make a child more likely to become exposed to lead? But they're definitely tied together in some cases. And of course, what that means is that kids that are long-term poisoning, you know, they're going to need special education. Some of those kids are going to need that special education throughout their whole school career. You know, they get into special programs at the Gabber Center, Head Start. So that there's a cost not only to the child, but there's a cost to society. So we throw this slide in here. Freddie Gray was a person that was involved with a police incident where he was basically, when he was being arrested, and he was shot by the police. But what they found out that Freddie Gray, and when he was a child, he was severely lead poisoned basically his entire childhood, and that affected his ability to learn. He got in trouble. You know, there's a whole raft of things that caused him problems, and it's not just simply focusing on him, but there's a cost to our society when these things are happening. Next slide, please. I don't know if they still see me or not. Yeah. So what can you do? Next slide, please. Did you put that in there? No. So at New York State mandates that kids at 1 year old and 2 years old, that, you know, your doctor, your pediatrician is supposed to know at those ages there should be a test for lead. You can call our office. We can give you all the information you need to get to that point. You basically get a prescription from your doctor to go get a blood test at wherever you're comfortable doing that. We want to see 0. That's what we're looking for. But if it's a 5 or better, that gets us, and that gets the environmental health side involved in doing an investigation. But we do offer some lead testing through our office. That's a finger stick method. The best method is to have it actually drawn from the vein. So, but your doctor should know that at 1 year old and 2 years old, they should be having a lead screening test at that point. Next slide, please. what we found is the best way to prevent lead poisoning is thorough wet cleaning. You know, one of my stock things I say is I have yet to meet anyone that says house cleaning is their most favorite thing to do in the world. I get that. Nobody likes to clean their house. But when you have little kids in places where there's lead present, the best way to prevent the poisoning is wet cleaning. You know, wet wipes on the windowsills, a Swiffer or a wet mop on the floors, and any other kind of tables or things that kids are near a lot. Any kind of flat surface needs to be wet cleaned as much as possible. If you work somewhere that is involved with lead, you know, take your shoes off before you come inside. Maybe you change your clothes outside and keep those clothes outside. Obviously, anything that your child uses regularly, if there's a certain toy, most modern toys, it's not an issue. But if you have older toys, they could be a source of lead. You know, make sure whatever toys your kid's playing with aren't falling apart and have kind of chipping finishing on it. And again, you know, around your home, you know where things are getting chipped and scraped. Again, your door casings, where windows are, when you see chipping and flaking paint, clean it up. You know, if it's on the floor, use a wet wipe and clean it up. If you have a vacuum cleaner that has a HEPA filter, that's a great thing to use in window troughs and on floors. So we can't emphasize enough that just thorough wet cleaning of your home is the best way to prevent lead poisoning, short of replacing everything that contains lead. Next slide, please. So hopefully you have a decent relationship with your landlord. You know, if they respond well to things, or if you have a maintenance person that you deal with, you know, let them know when there's issues with the paint. Again, where doors close, where windows open and close, you need to let them know so they can address it. Again, we kind of go on the assumption that if you're in one of the older homes in the county, you can just sort of assume that there's probably lead paint somewhere in there. So you need to let the owner and the landlord know, hey, we've got some places that need to be addressed. They should be able to do it fairly easily. You know, if you're not comfortable being in that situation, maybe you want to find somewhere else to live. I know it's very difficult to find a decent place to live. There's not a lot of vacancies in our community. Washing your child's hands is one of the best ways to do everything anyway. Sure, before they eat, before they go to bed, if they've been playing on the floor in the living room, perhaps even outside, if they're in the soil, thorough hand washing is a great prevention method. If your child has certain toys they use a lot, and as someone says, if there's something that they tease with, you know, wash them, you know, put them through the dishwasher or hand wash them in the sink. Anything that's being remodeled and renovated, maybe the bathroom is getting updated, maybe you're getting new cabinets in the kitchen, or something is going on because there was water damage. Any place where that remodeling and renovation is going on, kids should just stay away from. Again, we're just going to assume that there'll be lead present there, especially in the dust. So we want to keep kids and pregnant women away from those areas. Next slide, please. Our nurses are happy to give people all the information they want, but basically, calcium, iron, vitamin C, those have been shown to combat lead in the bloodstream of a child. You know, hopefully your kids like things like yogurt, ice cream, pudding. Those have good sources of calcium, mac and cheese. Iron helps combat lead. You know, so I'm sure all your kids really like beans and green leafy vegetables. But you know, if you got to force them to eat that stuff, please do. That's great. That's a great way to get lead processed out of the body. Some juices, you know, we try to say water is the best thing to use. only because the juices have a lot of sugar in them, but as long as you're cranking fluids through a kid, that goes a long way. And I'm sure if you can feed them lots of broccoli and spinach, they'll be happy about that. So try to be as healthy as possible in what you feed them. And as this big, at the end there, an empty stomach, if a kid's being exposed to lead, that's basically fast tracking lead through their body. Next slide, please. So here's an example. This is a bad example. I mean, it's a good example, but it's a bad situation. This is a door that's basically making paint chips fall right on the floor. And where is your child? Your child's on the floor. If you see this, you got to immediately take a wet wipe up those paint chips off the floor. The best thing in the world for this is you should contact your landlord and say, hey, listen, we got to get this addressed. This door casing, and maybe every door casing looks like that. They need to get that loose paint off of there and put a decent coat of paint over the top of it. Next slide, please. This is kind of bad, the exterior, but this is showing what water damage can do when a roof is leaking. That water ends up behind the walls essentially and lifts the paint right off. I mean, you can basically see there's mildew and mold, green mildew essentially growing on it. That means there's water damage. You won't be able to paint anything away if you don't solve the water damage first. So if you see a water leak in your house somewhere, you got to let your landlord know. That's going to cause some problems, not just with the roof. It's going to cause problems with the paint. And this is easily accessible for a child to walk up to, and that paint is just jumping off of that surface. That's a bad situation. Next slide, please. Again, this is a typical old window. There's no storm window, so it's being completely exposed to sun and rain, every day. The other part of this is, paint chips are not only falling off the exterior, they're probably falling into the interior too, and they're getting all over people's belongings. And so now there's paint chips in all of their stuff that's in the inside of the window. So not only is it coming from the window, now we've got paint chips and paint dust all over our stored, the stuff that we have in storage there. So that's a bad situation also. Next slide. Again, this is very typical. If you have windows that look like this in your dwelling, you need to pay attention to these. This particular window, again, the storm window is missing. So it's essentially being exposed to the elements all the time. Ultimately, this window really should be replaced, but at the very least, it should be maintained to some degree. Next slide, please. We talked about windows, but doors too. I mean, this is an extreme example, but this door does not fit well anymore. Houses settle over decades and the door sticks. You know which doors in your apartment or your dwelling, which ones stick when they open and close. So of course, every time that happens, if this door or the door casing, the door jamb has lead in it, all we're doing is we're scraping that lead paint off and sending it into the living space. So if the door doesn't close well, that's a problem. That's something that the landlord should be addressing. The other thing too is it's not very energy efficient. So really what should happen is that whole door unit should really just be replaced. If we were in your home as part of an investigation, we would insist to the landlord this particular door was positive for lead, and you can see that's in very bad shape. This is something we insisted that the landlord replace. So they replaced the entire door unit, new door, new casing, jamb, screen door, the whole thing. So that solved it by completely replacing it. Next slide, please. A ceiling can be problematic because, of course, where does all that paint want to go? It wants to fall onto the floor of the porch, whether it's an enclosed porch or open air porch. But this is classic kind of the water damage slowly can cause the paint to chip on the ceiling, and again, it rains down onto the floor. This is something that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. Same idea here, roof leaking, causing paint to jump off. Exterior, kids are playing in the backyard. If they're over in this area, this is just a bad situation. There's chipping paint all over the place. This is an exposure to lead right here. Bad situation. It needs, a lot of attention. It's very wet. It basically needs total rehabilitation at that point. New windows, perhaps put siding over it, but these things need to be addressed because kids can basically just walk right up to them and be exposed to lead. Next slide, please. This is about as bad as it gets. You know, this window is ancient, difficult to try to repaint this window. Again, this is, you know, there's no storm window. It's being weathered severely from the outside. It's beat up from the inside. You can see the staples that are in the windowsill where they probably had plastic for the winter to keep the breeze out. So again, you know, the solution here is just to simply replace this window. Not only does it get rid of their lead, but we can also make the house a little bit warmer in the winter. Next slide, please. Generally, walls, paint, or wallpaper for walls or lath and plaster walls did not or do not have lead in them. But the problem with here is if we've got a big hole in the wall, it's very, very easy for dust to kind of get out of that when the house sort of breathes with the draft of the house, right? So that should be repaired because it can be basically a draft route for the dust, lead dust, to kind of blow into the living space. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same unit, and this is about as bad as it gets. We've got paint basically right down to where it's bare wood. This is another situation where we would not even entertain the landlord saying, well, I'm just going to repaint this. We would not go for that. We would say that window has to be replaced. Next slide, please. Same deal here as a few slides ago. Water damage is causing this. You could repaint it, you know, probably every 3 weeks forever if you don't fix the roof leak. So the first thing that's got to happen is the roof's got to be fixed. Then we'll address the paint. Next slide, please. This is a very common one. You know, the door casing between a living room and a bedroom, or a living room and the kitchen, where we move furniture in and out and we scrape the door casing up. I think this particular one might have actually been a little bit because they had a dog that liked to scrape on things, but this is a bad situation. I mean, this is, you know, not only can a kid walk right up to it, but it's, you know, the floor is constantly having paint chips all over it. This is something that needs to be addressed. This might be a little bit more involved than just simply getting loose things off and repainting it. This is probably going to take a little bit more effort on the part of the owner to address this. But if you have things like this at your house, they need to be addressed. Just the age of that component right there would tell us that there's likely lead paint in a layer of paint somewhere there. So that needs to be addressed very soon. Next slide, please. Same deal here. This was also a spot where there was a baby gate that kind of halfway down the door casing where there's that big chunk out of the paint. There was a baby gate there that every time the baby gate was, you know, taken off and put back on, or your child, you know, grabs onto the baby gate and shakes it, whatever, it's basically wearing that paint right down layer after layer, not to mention everything else that's going on there, just all the other dings and scrapes in it. But so watch where your baby gate is on some of these door casings. That can be a problem. Next slide, please. So what we're trying to do is we try to get ahead of this. Again, that lowering the level from 15 to 5, the point of that was to be a little bit more proactive. For the most part, our program is reactive. You know, we don't intervene until a child has an elevated blood lead level. So, but at least when we get there at a 5 instead of a 15, the 5 at least lets us get ahead of it before it becomes a problem, before lead can start accumulating in the child. And a big part of that is just simply getting kids tested. Again, they're supposed to be getting tested at 1 and 2. If your child does have a lead level, he's basically going to get on a schedule of testing. So it might be like every 3 to 6 months. Your doctor is probably going to say, hey, we're going to have another lead blood test every 3 to 6 months until we can get the lead down. You know, we trying to get the word out to the community. And again, things like the Flint, Michigan water issue has at least put lead into a lot of people's thinking. We have a lot of programs that we're trying to reach out to the community, try to get people educated. And again, we're always trying to get both code enforcement and just the landlords. We're trying to get you know, trying to get things up to speed as far as the housing stock. You know, if we stay on the maintenance of our houses and we're not allowing things to peel and chip and flake, we'll be okay. So we need to improve the overall housing quality. That's basically the long-term goal, is to get windows and doors replaced, make sure things are maintained, and we try to work with the city in particular to try to improve our housing stock here as best we can. Next slide, please. So we've been working fairly well with Auburn code enforcement. Some of the code enforcement in our rural towns, they're maybe not so quite up to speed on everything. We're trying to educate them too, because we do have, you know, probably 2/3 of our cases are in the city of Auburn, and the rest are throughout the county. Again, that's just the fact that our population is centered in Auburn. So they created a task force 5 years ago, less than 5 years ago, to try to get, you know, code enforcement, social services, our department, kind of like all on the same page as far as like, here's what we all need to be thinking about. In Auburn, when tenancy changes, there's supposed to be an inspection by code enforcement, and if they see peeling, flaking, chipping paint, they're supposed to say to the owner, listen, those things have to be addressed before we're going to let a new tenant come in here, or before they get that certificate of occupancy. So that's another way we're trying to be proactive, is when tenancy changes or a particular owner needs this inspection, that's another way we can get things addressed ahead of time. Next slide, please. Does that zero me out again? They'll talk about healthy neighborhoods after I'm done, but that's something we're working in with. Great program to try to get people the resources they need. Sometimes they can provide some cleaning supplies, whatnot. Like I said, I'm always going to emphasize thorough wet cleaning of your home. Healthy Neighborhoods is a great program. They've got a lot of great information. They can point people in the right direction for things. They're trying to reduce overall hazards, not just lead, but they're trying to do all kinds of different hazards that are in your home. So take advantage of that program that they're going to talk about. We've been successful with them, helping out a lot of families here in Auburn. Next slide, please. That may be it. Oh, there we go. So again, they're going to talk to more about that. And this slide, I'm not sure if this slide is slightly out of date. Obviously, they're still working in the city of Auburn. They'll let you know if you're in Moravia or Locke, if they're still working in those communities. But they're also, like I said, fire issues, other things that, you know, we care about. So Healthy Neighborhoods is a great program to take advantage of. Next slide, please. So our website there, you can jot down that website, QEcounty.us. If you go to our health department website, you can find all kinds of information about lead and contacts for Kendra and myself. If you have particular concerns about where you're living, certainly feel free to give our office a call. We may be able to come to your home and at least maybe do a visual assessment. For the most part, we don't get fully involved, unfortunately, until after your child has a lead level. But again, we try to do that as soon as possible to try to get ahead of it. But anytime you have questions about lead or lead poisoning, certainly feel free to give our office a call. That 253-1560 number is our main number. So please feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome, Chris. So we do have, do I have anything else to add, Chris? Before
that's
we
it. Thank you.
The question
on lead. Yep, that's good. Yep.
Awesome. So we did have one question pop up here in the Q&A box. One person, and I'd like to ask everyone to take this opportunity as well. If you guys could put like a name, change your guys' name for the participants so that we could better address questions, and also so that we're able to get you guys the tenant books if you were one of the first 25 on. It just makes it a little bit easier for us. But we had a question, does the health department ever partner with any other community organizations like HEAP to do like window replacements? Like, is there any cross collaboration that goes on to try to, prevent some of this stuff before it gets really bad and chipped?
We have worked with, through the City of Auburn Planning Department, we've tried to, on particular, again, it's, some of it's reactive, but when a particular child in their home has had issues, we have worked with the City of Auburn Planning Department to provide, through them, they can provide some grant money through block grants to try to upgrade windows and doors. We work with Homesite at some frequency, same issue, that they may be coming to a home for maybe to replace a roof or a water heater or whatnot, but then sometimes they'll roll in, window replacement, door replacement into that if we've already been there and identified some lead hazards. But again, if it's a rental situation, it's obviously up to the owner, your owner or landlord, to pursue those grants. Again, unfortunately, it's sort of reactive. However, we have been talking about doing inspections of houses where people have kids that we have not had an elevated blood lead level yet. Maybe there'll be more to come, more information about that, but we're going to talk about doing like a proactive program where we would visit your home, before your child has a blood lead level, and then try to point the landlord in the right direction to address these things before we basically order them to do it. So at this point, there isn't really like a one-stop shopping kind of thing, like, okay, hey, I've got these issues and this is what we're gonna do. It's essentially several government agencies have to try to get together and coordinate this. So City of Auburn Planning Department and Homesite, we try to work with them as much as possible. And grant money kind of comes and goes, but one thing that grant money definitely gets spent on is when there's a lead poisoned child in a home. That's almost like an automatic, automatic for some grant money. And who knows, maybe in 2021, there might be new monies available to be more proactive about it. So I hope that answers the question. But.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And yeah, like you said, it is sometimes grant funding is, it can be hard to form long-term collaborations when funding is, 6-month grants or 1-year grants. So no, that was really great. So I guess, Chris, if you are ready, we can move on to our radon portion of the talk.
Sure. Awesome. Radon probably is something that, radon's probably a little harder to get our minds around than lead poisoning. I mean, we can say, lead's in paint, paint's chipping and peeling. That's a problem. Radon is different because radon is a colorless, odorless gas that you would have no idea if radon gas was in your home. Radon comes up, it's a naturally occurring radioactive element that comes out of the ground, basically. It comes out of the soil and rock that's underneath us. It can infiltrate through the foundation of our homes. It can come up through the floor of our homes, through floor drains in our homes. Basically, if you had a home on a concrete slab, even just the cracks in the slab, this radon gas can get into your living space. So why do we care? For years and years, radon gas has held second place in the top 5 ways that we develop lung cancer. Number 1 is smoking. Number 2 is radon gas. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States. And that's why it's troubling, is because you don't smell or see radon gas. so having said that, I mean, not trying to scare people, the best way to find out, do I have radon in my house or not, is to test for radon. So renters can certainly take advantage of this. The first week of November, we'll be offering testing kits that's free. The kits themselves are free. They're prepaid postage to send them to a lab, so it's at no cost to you. If you would like to know if you have the presence of radon gas in your home, you can do one of these test kits. Look for information. We'll advertise it fairly soon. It may not exactly start next week, but if it's not next first week of the new month, but it'll be by the second. But we can get you one of these test kits so you can find out, do you have radon gas in your home? Well, what happens if you do? I mean, if you're in a rental situation, there's not much that you as the tenant can do about it, but your landlord should know about this. And the fix for it is we can't make radon gas go away out of the earth, but the way we make it go away out of our homes is there basically has to be a fairly simple ventilation system installed, whether it may be in the basement, or if your house didn't have a basement, a crawl space or whatnot. There are basically ways to just simply ventilate it out of the home, but in your situation, that's something that the landlord or the owner would have to initiate. And there's companies that do nothing but radon mitigation, as it's called. There's certain parts of our county, the southern half of our county and the southeastern part of our county in particular, like Moravia. If you're on this webinar and you're in Moravia area, Moravia Lock, Niles, Summerhill, that part of the county in particular, because of the way the geology is, the testing that we've done over the years, kind of a disproportionate share of those were over the levels that we're concerned about. In other words, we get a result back that's quite high. We're going to reach right out to that person right away to start some sort of process to mitigate that radon. But there's other parts of our county, like the midsection, if you're in the town of Sennett, if you're renting in the town of Sennett, something about the geology through Sennett, we've had quite a number of sampling hits there that are fairly well over the area, the number of concern. If you're up towards Sterling and Victory, that's another part of our county that's an area of concern. But here in the city of Auburn, between about 20% of the radon testing that we've done has shown elevated levels. And that could affect the whole neighborhood, frankly. But obviously, again, we don't know until we do a test. So those testing kits will be available. So keep your eye out for those. The way some of the statistics we use are, it's essentially like you're getting lung cancer at a rate equivalent to like half a pack of cigarettes a day or something to that effect. So I hate to quantify it in terms of cigarettes, but that if we know that smoking causes cancer at a certain rate by your intake of cigarettes, it's the same thing with radon gas. It's at certain levels, radon gas is, a particular concern. If it gets too high, that's something people have to do something about right away. There's no waiting, because again, it's this odorless, tasteless, silent, basically poison that can be lurking in the air of our home. So obviously, if you're a tenant, that's not something you're going to have to initiate. That's something your landlord's going to have to do something about. So it's obviously it's going to take some time and some money to address it, but if there's anything in the public health realm that we can place our hands on and say, hey, 1 + 1 = 2, that's radon gas causing cancer. Here's what we can do. We're going to ventilate out the spaces to make sure that the interior of the home is safe. There's not like anything we can do to change the fact that it's out there. And once you've had a test that gets you, XYZ level, it pretty much doesn't change over time, because we're talking about geologic time here. This is stuff that's accumulated in the ground over, millennia. So if you've had a radon test and it comes back okay, generally speaking, unless there's some massive earthquake or something in our community, it's not going to change. So if you get a good result, that's great news. You don't have to worry about it. Pretty much don't have to worry about it again. If you get a high result, we got to do something about it. So if you would like to take advantage of a testing kit, probably in another week or so, give our office a call. Again, that same number, 253-1560. Give us a call and just say, hey, are the radon testing kits available yet, if you haven't seen like a press release or whatnot yet. Again, it's free. We'll walk you through how to do it. The postage to send the thing away is already prepaid. We get a result fairly quickly. There's about anywhere from about a 10-day turnaround, so we can get the results pretty quickly. And again, if the results turn out to be above the level of concern, we're going to reach right out to you. And at that point, we're going to reach out to the owner and your landlord to say, look, this is a bad situation, especially if maybe you're in a multi-family house. If you live in the downstairs and there's separate folks that live upstairs, so now we've got two different households of people that could be being exposed to this. We want to get on that as fast as we can and reach out to the owner and say, look, we need to do something about this. Now, if it's something that you wanted to talk to your landlord about first, please do. And if they would like to call us, we would certainly like for them to take advantage of it. So if you didn't want to initiate it, but your landlord said, gee, that's sure, if it's free and they want that information, then have your landlord reach out to us. We'd be glad to get them the testing kit, so we can find out what's going on. And again, it's another thing that once we have that result, it's something that we can get ahead of. It can be dealt with fairly easily, and we can eliminate a problem. Again, especially if you're in a multifamily household, we're going to get two or three families at once that are going to benefit from this. So please take advantage of it, or at least talk with your landlord about, hey, we got this free avenue to do a radon test. And I don't know, maybe your landlord's like, what's radon? Maybe they don't even know what it is. So have them reach out to us, and we'd be glad to get a testing kit out to you. But so think about it, and please act on that one at the very least. Again, it's a good free program, and it's something that we can get ahead of. And if you want more information on radon in general, New York State has a website just for that. It's a little long, but it's health.ny.gov/radiation. It is considered radiation, but don't get freaked out. It's not like, it has lung problems, not other problems, but that's under their radiation bureau. So again, it's health.ny.gov/radiation. But keep that 253-1560 number handy. Again, maybe in a week or so, give our office a call. We'd be happy to walk you or your landlord through the process of getting a radon test done. So if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
All right, we will open it up for questions about radon. If you guys want to use the chat box, either the chat box, the question and answer is a little bit easier. It should be like two little bubbles at the bottom of your screen. If anyone has any questions they'd like to input into the question and answer box. We'll give people a minute here just in case they're reviewing anything or.
This was yours, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to look at it. I'd like to look at it.
I don't need it anymore.
No, you don't?
Nope.
Anyone have any questions? Well, we still have Chris with us here.
You can take it if you want.
All right. I'm not seeing anything pop up, Chris. So thank you very much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
We're going to move on to our next portion here, everyone.
Excellent. You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good one. All right, so we are going to move on to our next portion here. I'm just going to pull up our next PowerPoint slide, and then we will spend 5 minutes, maybe 10, very quickly talking about our Healthy Neighborhoods program. Oh, I see a question pop up. So Chris just left the chat, but I see a question pop up. What I will do, the question is that, are there mobile homes in our area that families are living in? Are they less likely to have radon? That is an excellent question. So what we will do is we will reach out to Chris, and then